Developing Tomorrow's Leaders is a podcast that is all about educating, supporting, and inspiring the next generation of leaders. Your host, Antoine Thompson, has over 35 years of experience of inspiring and empowering many young men and women. Join Coach T as he talks with pediatrician, teen health and wellness coach, school consultant and professional development for K through 12, and keynote speaker, Dr. Miriam Mandel.
I am delighted to welcome to Developing Tomorrow's Leaders, Dr. Miriam Mandel. How are you today, Dr. Mandel?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing stupendously marvelous, as always.
Awesome.
You know me. I'm always doing great. Well, I'm excited to have you on because, as you well know, this is all about developing the next generation of leaders. And there are so many misconceptions about the growth and development of preteens and teens. And the brain development is a big part of that because we've all been through it, not knowing what we're going through.
Right,
and then having someone like yourself who studied the brain and understands that development process. And I would love to, first and foremost, find out what got you so interested in that aspect of teen development, the brain development.
Well, I was in conventional medicine for many years, and then I had always noticed that I asked very different questions than most physicians. Like, of course, we all ask the same, like history and physical and social history and all that kind of thing, past medical history. But I was always asking, like, what's kind of going on with these kids that they're developing, that they're manifesting these symptoms, and like, why do some manifest these symptoms and why do others not? And I had a situation with a little boy that was actually my last patient when I saw him, and it was basically what I was feeling was that there was so much connection between the mind and the body, and I always instinctively knew that. And I felt that in medical school that's so not taught, right? We're just really taught just physiology, and we're taught about just the body connection. And I always instinctively knew that it was so much more than that. And it always interested me. And when this little boy, and I had seen that in many different situations, but this particular little boy really struck something in me when I met him. And when I got to speak to the family about what was going on with him. He was about 5, and he had come in with a twisted gut. His intestines were twisted around each other, and he needed surgery. And I was thinking to myself, and he was only 5, and I'm like, what is going on with this kid that this is happening to him? Because he had no prior, birth history, past medical history. There was nothing else really going on. There was nothing going on genetically that would have caused something like this. And then I met his family, and I'm telling you, within 5 minutes, I had a stomach ache. Like, it was awful. It was two grandparents that were fighting, and it was a divorce situation. It wasn't the parents, it was the grandparents. And I had this one pulling me one way, this one pulling, like, don't tell this one. And just, it was just nasty. And I'm thinking, this poor kid is in this situation where I literally had a stomach ache just in the room with them. And so we have this child who's going to get surgery to release this, and have his abdomen, part of his intestines removed. And then what are we going to do? Like, we're just going to send him back to that same environment. And to me, that just didn't make much sense. And I felt like there was just so much more that we were not doing the field of conventional medicine. I had my own private practice, and I continued there for a bit, but I decided to eventually leave medicine, and I started to study about mindfulness and meditation and different holistic types of medicine. I became a Reiki master. I got into homeopathy. I was just kind of feeling what was really working. I had been meditating for quite some time, but I really kind of picked up my meditation practice, especially after the Reiki training. And I started teaching in the hospitals. I was teaching like doctors and nurse practitioners about all the studies about mindfulness and meditation and the health benefits, and how we can pretty much change what's going on with us physically with our mind, and using some of the power of our mind to do that. And I used all research based, like through the National Institute of Health. I used all good quality reviewed research, and I was fascinated by what I was finding. I mean, this was stuff that the government's paying millions of dollars to have this explored, and most people don't know it. So that's where I started. And it's kind of, I've taken a lot of different paths since then. But that's kind of what got me in that direction.
Yeah. What's
So that was
interesting
a
about
long answer.
no, that's fine. No, I mean, I think it's important, but I think it's you really laid a foundation for a lot of what this conversation is going to be about, and it's always understanding the why,
Right.
because there's always a root cause of a situation. And what you described with this young boy, 5 years old, it's what's happening internally,
Right.
within the family that affects, and we don't realize what impact it has on kids. And then I'm actually going to jump in because this is a great opportunity for me to ask this question. So when we think about preteens and teens going through their education over the last couple of years,
Hmm.
being removed from the conventional classroom and having extended virtual learning, and some of these kids being in a dysfunctional family to start with,
That's
now
right.
they're having extended time with that dysfunctional situation. What lasting impacts does that have in relation to their personal growth, and obviously with their brain development at that stage?
Well, that's kind of a big question, just because it really depends on what age they're at.
Right.
And, I mean, with some kids did really well during the pandemic. Like I have two kids, one of them did really well during the pandemic, and one of them didn't. She just really missed being in school, and one of them just thrived. So, it kind of depends on the kid about the whole pandemic thing. There was a lot of repercussions from that with the mental health issue, and which is extremely unfortunate. But depending on their age, I mean, a lot of the programming, like literally like programming that we get as a child, is from preconception, like the third trimester of pregnancy, until about 7. And during those age, that's a very critical age when things in a child's environment, like if you think about it, we can't sit a child down and teach them social rules, right? We can't have them read a book or have them have a discussion about how they should behave and how they should, live in a family and communicate and things like that. So the way that children that young will get this information is they don't have like a filtering process like older kids and adults, where if somebody says something to you or you feel a feeling that feels off, we can kind of reject it. We can say, no, I'm not going to accept that, or that doesn't sound right for me. But under 7, there's no filter. So it goes right into their subconscious. So these are the things that most of us are dealing with, this subconscious programming as an adult. And, we all try to be the best parent we can, but we do the best that we can, generally. But a lot of these behaviors and a lot of these subconscious thoughts, which takes up much of our daily life, like research has shown up to 95%, is that we're actually dealing with subconscious, these underlying issues that we got from when we were very young. And what unfortunately they don't really talk about changing them, because we actually can change them. Some people don't realize that they can change them, and we can as adults. Obviously it's easier as children. Yeah, so it really depends on the age. And then there are issues obviously with pre-adolescents, adolescents during their brain development. Very important for kids that age to have that social community. It's really part of our biology. If you see like adolescents and this is cross species, like they need, even like packs of deer or different adolescent birds, like you can see things, you can see different types of animals flocking together. And a lot of times adolescents will come together because they need that. They practice social skills, they practice things that they need to survive in a group because there's safety in numbers. So that goes for humans too. And when somebody would be kicked out of whether it's a human or any other animal, if a young, like an adolescent, part of that group was kicked out, or anyone was actually kicked out or left alone, they would die. So it's biologically in our genes to want to be in a group and have that safety and have that connection. And that's why as adolescents, we push away from our parents, because we need to find our own tribe. Right. And so it's about, with humans or with other animals, a lot of times it's about finding your tribe and then coming back. But they have to have those pushing away moments. It's built into us biologically. So a lot of times parents will take that personally. The way the whole brain is set up is to have that happen. So we are geared towards that. So it has nothing to do with the parents. I mean, there's been articles showing that there are actually times in development in adolescence where a child or an adolescent will block the mother's voice. It literally, like they will be blocking they won't hear them like they would like a friend, or a peer. And that's just part of our biology. So parents, sometimes when they understand some of the things, don't take it as personal.
I'm going to repeat that one because I think that's really important. No, because I think you're absolutely right. They take it personally because they're assuming. I can be honest with you. I've been around kids long enough from, let's say 9, 10, and then I'm around them till they're like 13, 14. Yeah. And I see the change in even me, because we built a really good relationship, but then I see them now kind of drift, and I'm kind of like, hey, kind of what happened here?
Right.
But then I realized that is part of that process. But then guess what? We develop a different type of relationship. It's still strong because once I understand where they've gone, I can reconnect and understand it. Yeah. And now I can communicate with them on their level, still like we did before, but now they've evolved to another level. And then that's a great point. And so do you have a couple of tips for parents to prepare them for this transition, because we know it's going to happen and it's part of their development?
Yeah. I mean, really, I guess the only thing I would say is to be aware of it and to support it, because it is something like the more we resist it, the more there's going to be pushback. And that's really with anything, with anybody, not even just kids, right? I mean, a spouse or a friend, like when we set certain expectations or demands, nobody wants to do what somebody else wants them to do, right? And it goes probably twice as much for an adolescent. So just understanding that this is a normal part of biology, even, I don't think it's necessary to really tell your kids that, but I mean, it is a normal part of their development. So, they should know that sometimes this is going to happen. And it's because they don't even understand it. They don't understand why it's happening. And it will come on sometimes very quickly, where a child is pretty, a lot more dependent on a parent. And then they get to a certain age, or, during puberty, and it's going to change quickly. And there are so many things going on in the pre-adolescent and the adolescent brain that really make these kids into different little humans. Like they are completely being rewired. So I like to talk about that with parents. I talk quite a bit about that in the schools, because then they understand that it's what's normal and then what to expect, because there are some really pretty developmentally appropriate things that happen during certain times that are pretty predictable.
And I would also think that during this process, that the interaction with peers and friends, they could increase the tenacity of that change, meaning it could be more immediate as opposed to gradual, because of the influences outside the home. Is that fair to say?
And it probably has to do with the relationship too. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some overlap there. Yes, it is biology, but if you don't have a strong base with your child, then that's going to be probably more dramatic, versus if your child is feeling more at ease. And some of it is going to be genetic too. Some of it is, it's not to blame anybody. It's just, I think that, I mean, what I've seen with my clients and with my kids, it's that if there is that strong base, it's not going to be as dramatic as some of these other kids that are quite dramatic, getting involved in really needing to feel like part of gangs and part of, I mean, I did my medical school in New York and in Brooklyn, and there were some, 12, 13-year-olds out coming. I mean, and I learned, because these kids, like, gangs is a big thing. That's why kids join gangs. They actually need to feel part of something. So very important, sports are great. I'm a big, I love to see kids getting involved in sports and being part of a team. Some schools, it's even required. I think there's some science behind that.
No, there definitely is, but there's also been a significant fall off, obviously due to COVID, with athletic participation. Perfect example here in this area here in North Carolina. Several of the schools went from having, junior varsity and varsity teams to only having one team because they didn't have enough players that would participate, student athletes that would participate, and primarily because of being separated for so long. And I think, again, going back to my question, I was talking about the extended virtual learning process and the lack of the social and emotional connections that they were so accustomed to with the day-to-day education environment, allows some of them to disconnect from the extracurricular activities and, to your point, reaching out for other social engagements besides athletics.
So when you say that, do you mean like when the kids were allowed to go back, they chose not to go to sports?
Exactly.
It's interesting.
Yes.
Why do you think that is?
I think, in my opinion, I think it's because of the extended separation. It gives them an opportunity, just like with all of us, even as adults, it gives us a chance to reflect on where we were, where we are, and where we're going.
Yeah.
And it's like, how important are sports to me now that I've been removed from it for a certain amount of time?
Got you.
Where do I see myself? Am I really going to be that kind of player? And we're talking about kids that have been playing up to sophomore in high school, and then all of a sudden junior, senior year, which is usually your most exciting time to be there. Like, I think I'll give that up.
I didn't realize that was going on, the sports.
Yeah, it is. It's unfortunate, but at the same time, you're kind of explaining some of the reasons why. And as as you explained it, it just kind of stood out to me.
That brings up something too that goes on now. How old were these kids?
We're talking 13 to 15.
Yeah, so that's really prime age of. There's a certain development that happens. So in pre-puberty, right before puberty, and and leading up to that, the circuits in the brain, like the connections in the brain, are huge. Meaning there's a ton of them. There's the same amount of neurons, so there's the same amount of nerve cells, but there's a lot of different connections. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like it could be one cell connecting to another cell, and instead of two connections, now there's 150, right? So what's happening in their brain during this pre-puberty time is they're just absorbing as much information from the environment as possible. So they would be more interested in starting a sport. They'd be more interested in learning the guitar or learning all these new things. They ask a ton of questions. They're very curious about everything. This is part of what makes them human. And so they want to know, and they sometimes don't even care about the answer. They're just asking and asking and asking, trying to absorb all this information from the world that they're, kind of new in. And then what happens at around 12, 13, 14, through puberty up until actually 25 when it finishes. But once they start hitting puberty, and 15 is a perfect example, 14, 15, when a lot of times things go awry with these kids, what's happening is these connections that they're so massive, they actually get cut in half. So they're losing some of these connections. So things that they loved to do when they were younger is no longer interesting to them because those connections were separated. So what I'd like to make a point here with kids and with parents is also this also comes into addiction too. When you are during this phase of your life, 13, 14, 15, when you are really creating the circuits that are going to be solidified as an adult, you're starting to really disassociate with the ones that are not going to be meaningful, and you're strengthening the ones that you need as an adult. So this is a process that it's kind of use it or lose it. So if these kids use something over and over again, whether that's sports, whether that's something that they know they want to do when they get older, like if they're an actor or an actress, or they're a singer, or if they're a football player and they know they want to do this for the rest of their life, or maybe not the rest of their life, but they want to pursue this, or a drug. That's when they start vaping. That's when they start experimenting with cigarettes. Those circuits are going to get really, really strong. And they're going to continue to get strong as long as they do it. So I do have a lot of kids that are vaping. They start like 11 or 12 years old and they get caught. And then I get a call from the parents. And what's so important, especially if they're under 15, that if they continue to do that behavior, because it's the reward pathway, it's going to be extremely addictive. It's going to be every time they do it, they're reinforcing those circuits, and they're reinforcing it in a way that feels really good. So it's going to be a lot harder to quit as an adult. If somebody starts to vape after 25, when their brain is fully developed, it's not as much of an issue. It's still very bad for you, but these kids, it's like almost that like these kids, this young generation that are, and the vaping is totally completely out of control. I mean, it's skyrocketing with these young kids. There's going to be a point where, see if I can explain it. So what's happening when they are vaping, they are actually inhaling something just like they would with heat, right? Like a crack cocaine. So they use crack cocaine. Now, I'm not saying it's the same as crack cocaine, but I'm saying the delivery device is the same. And what makes that important is because when they inhale it, it goes right into their brain. So it's with heat, and it crosses the blood. Nicotine crosses the blood-brain barrier. So they're getting almost an instant release of dopamine. So now think about this. These kids at this young age are able to control their dopamine. They're able to get it on demand and almost instantly. Dopamine is a very potent, right? We all know it. That's the cause of addiction, right? That's what causes us to crave, because what happens is they get this increase of dopamine. And then what happens is after a couple of hours and the half-life wears off, that dopamine comes down, but it doesn't come down to steady state. It doesn't come down to here, right? It was up here and now it comes down and then it goes down here. So the dopamine is even lower. That's what's going to cause the craving, no matter what drug it is. So like something like, vaping actually causes quite a bit of an increase in dopamine that feels really good to them. They get a little bit of a high, they get a little bit of a buzz, they get that feeling of concentration, they can focus, because it's not just, it's not just the dopamine. There's other things involved too. With nicotine, it affects the nicotinic receptors in our brain, which can cause some of those things that they're craving, and then they'll crash. And then a few hours later, they start to crave it, and then they'll take another couple hits off of it, come back up again. But what they don't understand is that they're going to need more, like tolerance, right? The body builds tolerance, and they're going to need more and more and more of it. So that's how people become chain smokers, because same thing with cigarettes. Except with cigarettes, it's not as quick as with vaping. It's much quicker. That dopamine release is much quicker. So it's not a joke. People, and it's advertised to kids, and it's kind of made like it's not that bad, and it's bad. It's bad. And we're having a generation of these kids that are, if you think of it that way, right? Like they're controlling their dopamine on demand. That's not the way the world works unless you're a drug addict, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So they're not realizing that doing a sport, going out for a run, that's going to release dopamine. There are things, we have dopamine receptors in our brain. We have these nicotinic receptors in our brain and our body for a reason, because we need these things. But when they're abused, then you're going to start getting into problems. But naturally, we can get these things. We can get dopamine, right? I mean, there's all sorts of studies on, you can take a cold shower and the dopamine effect can last for hours. There are different things that we could do. So sports is a great one. And that's why I think some of these kids that are involved in sports are going to be that can actually help get them off of vaping, but they'll be less likely to become addicted because they're going to get that high. They know what that feels like. A kid that's in high school that's a runner, or in junior high that's a runner, they know what that feels like. Talk about it. Like these coaches should be talking about it, talking about dopamine, talking about how they can feed this to themselves. They don't need that other crap, So it's just, but unfortunately, a lot of people don't know. They don't know yet. So.
Well, they're learning now, because this is great. This is again, it's why I wanted to have you on, because it's just, for me, that last part is quite interesting, because in the role that I'm in, I have an opportunity to share that, not just from the basketball aspect of it, but the impact of it in their lives beyond sports, and how you can replace that. And, you talk about dopamine. I mean, social media is another example of it.
Yes.
When people get addicted, this is adults too, but kids do as well. Mm-hmm. And it's it has the ability to have a lasting negative impact, because they're trying to compete with everybody else for likes and follows and all these things, and trying to go viral. And then they start doing crazy stuff just to get attention and likes again. So that also is another aspect of it. But I also want to ask you something. I think it kind of transitions. So we talk about the need for the dopamine and through vaping and so forth. But there's another aspect that I think affects young people, and that is the amount of sleep that they get. And because of digital or electronic devices, they're preoccupied and they're losing quality sleep. And they're going off of, like, when you're in your early 20s and you're out. Well, I'm dating myself, but you go out partying on the weekends and you stay up till 2, 3, but then you got to pop back up and go to work at 8, and you do it. But they're doing it so much earlier now, and the lasting impact it can have on their development.
Sleep is such an underrated. I mean, sleep is so huge, especially with the adolescent. I mean, it is really for all of us. There are so many things going on. People think that we go to sleep and we're just in this unconscious state. But during REM sleep, we have different phases of sleep. But during that rapid eye movement part of sleep, our brains are actually 30% more active than when we're awake. So there's a lot of processing going on during sleep. And with teenagers, what the problem is, this is what causes, people talk about drunk driving, but have you ever heard of Matthew Walker? He's a scientist over at UCLA. He says the number of people, rounded to the nearest whole number, that can cognitively be unimpaired with less than 6 hours of sleep is 0. He says it's more likely to be struck by lightning than to have no cognitive deficit with under 6 hours of sleep. So that's a very strong statement. He's written a book called, I have it around here. It's called Why We Sleep. Yeah, great book. Actually, I have it right here.
Okay.
This is a great book, Why We Sleep. And he has podcasts and he does a lot of interviews. And I mean, it's amazing what goes on in sleep. I studied sleep for about two years because I was completely fascinated with it. So it was hard to kind of let that go. But I talk a lot about sleep. But what happens specifically with the adolescent So these kids in middle school and high school, a lot of times they have late start. Have you heard, do you guys have late start in North Carolina?
What is
Late start
meaning
is
starting the day later in the
starting,
day, you mean?
starting school. They can sleep in one day a week.
Right. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So that's actually based off of the research done and the recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics, which suggests an 8:30 start time for school to give kids enough of that REM sleep that they're getting mostly in the early morning, right? But what happens is teenagers get kind of it broken off in both ends. So what happens is we have this hormone in our brain that gets released. Actually, it starts in the morning, but what happens is we have a hormone called cortisol in the morning. We get a release of cortisol, which turns to serotonin, which 16 hours later after waking generally will turn to melatonin, which is the sleep hormone. So it's all on this cycle. All of our sleep is on this cycle. All of our cells are on this 24-hour circadian cycle. But what happens with adolescents is most adults, if they're on a regular sleep cycle where they're working during the day and they're sleeping at night, will start to get sleepy at around 10 o'clock, approximately. There are some people chronologically that will be a little bit later and some earlier, but basically the average is about 10 o'clock. And obviously, as little kids go to sleep earlier, they're more tired, they need more rest. But during adolescence, what happens is this melatonin, and I noticed this huge in my kids. Like this was like so obvious in my kids. They were going to sleep at around the same time, 9:30, 10. And then all of a sudden it was like in middle school, it happened to my daughter in middle school a little early. My son was a little bit later. She just could not fall asleep. Like no matter what she did, she wanted to go to sleep and she couldn't fall asleep. And a lot of times adults will think that their kids are just being obstinate. They're being, they're just not listening to them, but these kids cannot fall asleep because their melatonin is shifted to sometimes 3 hours. So their melatonin isn't coming out, getting active until about midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. They physically they're not tired. So it becomes like this sleep anxiety cycle, where like they're being yelled at to go to sleep. The kid actually sometimes wants to go to sleep and they can't fall asleep, right? Yeah. But it's nothing wrong with them. That's a normal process that they go through. So that's why we have many schools have late start to give these kids a little bit more sleep to make that up because they know that's happening. Now, once a week, is it really going to be helpful? I guess it's better than nothing, right? I mean, ideally, school should start at like 10. That would be ideal. The kids can get up at 8:30 and have a breakfast and then go to school and they'll be at their peak. They'll be ready to learn. They're not ready. They're not ready because at, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, because there's still a lot of melatonin around, where in an adult, as soon as we hit bright light, within a few minutes, our melatonin is going to decrease. With kids, when they get up at like 7, it's like us getting up at like 4 o'clock in the morning. Like they're not fully there yet. They need some time. And that's why, my son was this way. My daughter, not so much, but my son, like just not a morning person. Like he could not function at getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning. He did it because he had to, or 7:30. But now he's better. Like he kind of got through that phase, but it is something that most kids go through. So they're missing the deep part of sleep at the beginning of their cycle. And then as the cycle continues for all of us, we get less deep sleep and more REM sleep. Okay. So it's like, say we start off with 5% of REM sleep the first hour and then 10%, and then it increases. So by the end of the sleep cycle, like in the early morning hours, we're getting mostly REM sleep. Okay. So these kids are going to bed later. Their deep sleep is starting later. And then these kids are being woken up in the middle of their REM sleep.
Their REM sleep. Yeah.
So what's happening during REM is a lot of the emotional processing is happening during REM sleep. Their growth hormones, those sex hormones are being released, and some of their long and short, from the short-term memory to long-term memory, that's being affected. So these kids don't realize, like when I talk in schools with teachers or parents, I always try to really emphasize, and kids too, because they'll attend some of them, that sleep could really be their superpower. If they know how to regulate their sleep and they're getting a full 8 hours of sleep when their peers are getting 6 or 5.5 because they're up doing their homework and they are studying really, really late. When you're sleeping, you're actually doing your body so much more good for remembering, for being, more alert, for being able to just perform much better. It's just interesting because, and then these kids are driving. So under 6 hours of sleep, it's like they're driving drunk.
Drunk, yeah. Well, good Lord, man, I'm not doing myself any favors.
No.
I don't sleep 8 hours. I don't sleep 8 hours. I can't.
Well, an adult 7 is like the cutoff. Like a lot of adults can function, but if you're getting less than 6 hours of sleep, you're not at your best. You're just not cognitively. You're not at your best. You're not going to be as sharp. You're not going to be as alert. You're not going to be as focused. And if you feel like you are now, like get 8 hours or 7 hours of sleep, and then see how much
right.
you can, and getting on that cycle, because our bodies are on these cycles. So when we don't get that, we're really working against physiology. Whenever we work against physiology, we lose.
We
right?
lose, yeah. If not short term, you will in the long term.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is great, great, great info. I mean, and I hope there are some parents out there that are truly taking note, and hopefully they'll listen more than once, and they may listen to it a second time and start taking down little notes, which is why I want to have you on, because your experience is so important. Now, I meant to mention in your bio too that you worked in my area for a while, in the Charlotte area.
Yeah, I did my residency at Carolina's Medical Center. Yeah.
Yes.
I lived in Charlotte.
Yeah.
It was really fun. I liked it there a lot.
Yeah, it's about 30 minutes from me where I am. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Hop, skip, and a jump. Now, tell us about your business, Exhale With Me, your website. You want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Basically, what I do is I work with schools. I work mostly through word of mouth. I work with a lot of teachers. I do professional development, and many times I wind up seeing their kids as a one-on-one on adolescent coaching, health coaching, wellness coaching, things like that. So I work with a lot of adolescents in that respect. And then it's mostly just through word of mouth. So I have a lot of the clients in the same areas. I have seen a couple of clients on LinkedIn, just people that have been following me for a while who have asked if they can't find somebody or they have a particular issue that I would be able to help with. And I will see sometime, every once in a while, I'll see a child on Zoom on LinkedIn. But mostly I do adolescents in my area and work with schools either in my area or that I do Zoom. I do a lot of Zoom with faculty and parents. So that's really I love to work with parents. And this was goes back to why I got into this part of medicine, is because when I was first going into school, I actually was getting my PhD in psychology. That was my long-term goal. I was not in pre-med. I wasn't doing pre-med. I changed as in my junior year in college. And my closest friend was killed in a car accident. And that kind of just changed the whole trajectory of my life. And when I went back to Long Island, I'm from New York. So when I went back to Long Island to see her parents and be at the memorial service, the fact, I get goosebumps thinking about it, but the fact that I could not soothe the parents, because they saw me and they saw their daughter, because we were inseparable growing up. We lived on the same block. We lived a couple houses over. We did everything together, we went to camp together, went to school together. We did sleepovers. We did everything together. And when they looked at me, there was such a despair. And one of the things that I wanted to transition into medicine was I wanted to be able, I felt so helpless at that time. Of course, as a doctor, we're helpless sometimes too, right? We can't, that's something that couldn't have been avoided. But my whole thing was to soothe parents. And that was always my favorite thing, was to be able to, they would be upset or they would be worried about their child, and it was nothing to be really worried about. And that was always my favorite part of that particular job. And now that's really what I do. I do a lot of that, like a ton of that. It's like I'm always doing that. And because I can do it in this respect. Because the kids that I'm seeing are kids that want to do the work. They get the results that they're looking for. Their parents are happy. They're really, and it generally goes relatively quickly. Like I don't, there are some kids that are longer than others, but there are sometimes like I tell the parents, like, I don't really want to take your money anymore. Like your kids, like she's good or he's good, and we become friendly. Like, these kids, like I'll take them out for coffee or we go walk for walks in the park and things like that. Unfortunately, not everybody has the income for a coach. So, I try to keep it really relatively with that in mind.
Right,
I really
right.
do. And a lot of times these kids, they don't need very long. It's not like therapy where you're in for 10 or 15 years. Like sometimes these kids 6 months to a year and they're really good to go, and some of them choose to stay longer. Like I have a lot of college students and I do that on Zoom too. I do college because these kids are off in college and they're in different places. And actually makes it easier for me because they can do it during times that are not after school hours. They can do it earlier. It's so fulfilling. This has been like my dream job. I love it. And I've been doing it about, gosh, I've been doing it for like over 10 years. It's just kind of transformed quite a bit through the years. And
Yeah, but you're describing a big part of, I think, is what's missing for some kids too, and knowing that parents are reaching out to you and for your support and for your leadership and guidance and experience. And when you connect with kids and they realize, hey, there's somebody out here that really cares about how well I do, besides my family, I think it gets them focused faster than them struggling trying to find their way for some, because they try, going back to what you're saying too, is that feel that need to be wanted and to fit in. And I think sometimes they find it in different places. So it's great that you're a resource for them.
That's true. And I love my clients. Like I love my patients. It's even easier to love my clients because I see them regularly and I text them, I keep up with them. They make commitments for a week or 2 weeks of what they're going to do. And I'm checking up on them and they love it. They do. And I send them quotes and, they become part of my family. So, and that's why I don't necessarily take a lot of people from online because I really like to build relationships with them and at least be able to see them once in a while. Sometimes we'll do Zoom like when they're at school, but I like to be able to see them once in a while.
Yeah, but you're also teaching them the importance of relationships beyond just the immediate family and from the school environment. So I think that's another huge benefit for what you do, not just for you, but for them as well. So continued success with that. And typically, I would invite all of my guests to be a member of the Village of Inspiration, but I am proud to say that Dr. Mandel is already a member of the Village of Inspiration. So I'm very honored to have her be a part of that. And I would ask you one other question, if you will share with us, is the person or individuals that have been most influential in your life and why?
Well, it's an easy question, maybe not what you're expecting. I had a difficult adolescence, starting at around 14. I have a narcissistic mother, and whenever I would connect with somebody outside of the family, she would break that off. And so I always wanted to find that person that I could connect with as a teen, and I never had it. Or it was taken away, or my animals were taken away. Whatever I became really close and attached to was taken away. So I felt that I wanted to give back in a way where some of these kids are looking or seeking, maybe not in the way that I needed, but just some added support, because it's it can be a very difficult time. It doesn't have to be a very difficult time, but there are so many changes that are going on, so many things that are misunderstood, and things that, like, we didn't know these things when I was young, when I was an adolescent. This is relatively new information that we're getting, the past 20, 30 years, where we're having some of this technology where we can see what's going on in the brain, see that adolescents are using different parts of their brain than adults are. And that's why they interpret things different. They could take your tone of voice to mean it's aggressive when it's really not, because they're using a different part of their brain. So when a parent says something and the child snaps at them, like, what, like, why are you being like that? It's because they're actually using a different part of their brain and they're not connecting the dots like an adult would. They don't have the capability yet to do that until their brain is fully formed. So there's so many things that are going on that there's just, once you understand it, like even a facial expression, like you can look at a kid with concern and they can see anger or they can see aggression because they're using a different part of their brain. So our prefrontal cortex, which is pretty much here, it's the last thing to develop. So kids develop, or humans develop their brain from the back to the front and from the inside out. So the prefrontal cortex is on the outer part of the front. So that's going to be the last to develop.
Yeah.
It just explains a lot. It explains a lot,
No, I have no expectations when I ask that question. I do it for the sole purpose of finding out, but from each person, because everybody's different. And yes, that is a first different approach. But again, it goes to show you that you can be inspired by a lot of different things.
Yeah. And I honestly, I'm so grateful for my upbringing. And even though it was difficult during those times, I had a great childhood, but my adolescence was very rough. But I'm so grateful for what I had a great father. My father was like the best. He passed quite a while ago, but was such a great father. And I got a lot of care from him, a lot of warmth and connection from him. But I wouldn't change it because I feel like I'm doing so much more good now to so many more kids than I was in pediatrics, I felt like I was always putting on Band-Aids and then sending these kids back to toxic environments. And it used to really bother me. And now I don't have to do that. Now I can help change the environment. And it's so gratifying. It's so, so gratifying. So I'm just helping them on a different level. And it really resonates with me very strongly.
I love that part is you weren't satisfied with bandaging things and you wanted to actually solve issues, and that's what we need more of. So that's why I'm really appreciative of your coming on and sharing with us. So thank you so much, Dr. Mandel. Do you have any words of encouragement for any of the parents and maybe young people that are listening to you today?
Well, actually, before that, I do also want to say that I am a big believer in medicine. My kids are vaccinated. They get antibiotics when they need them. It's not that I think medicine is great and I utilize it. I just wanted to help on a different level. So I just wanted to make that clear. But I think the biggest thing I would say is educate yourself. Don't listen to, the social media is going to be pushing things that is going to be making them money. They're using our kids to, especially with vaping, that's just a big thing now. I have a lot of clients that are vaping and I'm trying to educate them. But people that are saying that it's not bad for you are making a profit off of you. And that's one thing I know that nobody, especially teenagers and adolescents, don't like. They don't want to be taken advantage of. And these adults are taking advantage of them. They're taking advantage of the parents too for not knowing. Like, do the research. I know it's not easy because you go on the internet and you're going to be getting all sorts of false information. Like, there's just a lot of false information. And I'm not always the biggest one on research. I understand. I've been involved in research. I've done it. I see how sometimes there could be some variation, put it that way. But at this point, we don't have, and these peer-reviewed articles that are out, that are in, not necessarily very easy to find, unfortunately, but the information is out there. The truth is out there. It just takes some effort to get to that truth, not just going on TikTok and seeing an advertisement that vaping isn't that bad. And you're like, okay, good, great, vaping isn't bad, because that's what you want to believe. Right. But if you just think about it, you're inhaling a substance that's addictive plus, up to 30, 60 chemicals inhaling this into your lungs. Like, how could that be good for you?
Yeah.
How could there really be a benefit there? That's going across your blood-brain barrier. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that it's not good for developing brains,
Yeah. Actually, it's rocket searching.
Yeah, that's right.
No, you're right. No, you're right. I can see how animated you're getting about that, because it truly is that simple. But like you said, that's the one benefit of TikTok when it does its advertising, short and to the point. And that's all people catch, the short and to the point.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, well, the short and to the point. That's all I need to know. That's all I need to know.
Right.
To your point, do your research. There's a lot more to it under those quick hits, if you will.
Yeah. And when it's something that's concerning your kids, like, go to a reliable resource, go to your doctor, go to somebody who's educated in that particular thing that you're questioning. Don't get your information from Instagram and TikTok and, random websites. They're not always accurate.
Really? I would have never thought that. I just knew that the internet was so reliable. I mean, whatever you read on the internet has got to be true.
That's true. That's true.
Gotta be true. Nah. We know that that's not true, but good Lord, it is. It's just another platform to advertise. So many good and bad things. But listen, I know that you have to go. You're so busy and so important, and I understand that there's a Learjet on its way to take you to wherever it is you got to go.
My son. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Is it almost there? Because it's almost time to pick him up from school.
Yeah. It should be landing any minute. Well, Miriam, really appreciate your time, and look forward to speaking to you soon.
Yeah, I love speaking with you. I do. I really enjoy our time. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate it. Well, folks, as always, I'm Coach T. I'm here to educate, support, and inspire the next generation of leaders. Until next episode, take care.
Don't forget to check out Coach T's new podcast, Teen Speak, with fellow youth empowerment and leadership coach, Keith Senzer. Keith and Coach T interview teens and discuss challenges as well as victories that they have experienced. Available on your favorite podcast platform.